3 hours? That's all it took. Command trucks gone, hidden boats exposed and burning, launch sites carved into hillsides, sealed shut. Iran says nothing happened. The satellites say otherwise. And tonight, we show you exactly what Tehran doesn't want you to see. Welcome back to WW3 Global Report. If you're joining us for the first time, you've landed exactly where you need to be. This channel exists for one reason: to give you the facts, the analysis, and the full picture without the noise. Now, before we go any further, if you're someone who likes to stay informed, who wants to understand what's really happening in the world rather than just hearing about it secondhand, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing. It takes 2 seconds, and it means the next briefing lands right in front of you the moment we publish it. And we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's always remarkable to see just how far this community reaches. Now, let's get into it. It was August 1st, and in the skies above Iran's southern coast, the United States had just carried out one of the heaviest F-16 strike operations of the entire war. 3 straight hours. That's how long American fighter jets kept hitting targets, one after another, with a level of precision that gave Iran almost no time to react. This war has been running since February, but analysts say last night stands out as one of its most intense nights yet. To understand why this strike matters, it helps to look at what happened just 2 days earlier. Iran fired 5 ballistic missiles at a U.S. air base in Jordan. All 5 missiles were intercepted. Not one got through. For American commanders, that moment was more than a defensive win. It was proof that Iran's missile threat was being tested and answered. So what came next wasn't random. It was planned. At 10 p.m. Eastern Time on July the 29th, U.S. Central Command released an official statement. It confirmed strikes on dozens of targets tied to Iran's Revolutionary Guard. 4 separate categories were hit in the same operation: command centers, missile and drone facilities, coastal surveillance and defense sites, and maritime capabilities along the southern coast. Military analysts say hitting 4 different target types in one coordinated strike is not something forces do casually. It takes planning, it takes intelligence, and it takes confidence that the target locations are correct. This wasn't a warning shot fired into the desert. It was a structured operation aimed at weakening the systems Iran uses to threaten shipping lanes and U.S. forces stationed in the region, command infrastructure, surveillance networks, vessels used to intimidate or block commercial traffic. All of it targeted in the same window of time. Within hours, Iranian state media began reporting explosions, locations near Bushehr, near Abu Musa, near Kish. But alongside those reports came a familiar message from Tehran. No confirmed damage. Nothing serious, they said. This is where the story becomes harder to ignore. Multiple explosions across multiple locations, all in the same night, and officials calling it nothing. Either the American strikes accomplished what U.S. Central Command says they did, or Iranian state television just confirmed several coordinated failures happened at once. Both explanations point to the same outcome: a weakened position for Tehran. This pattern isn't new. Deny first. Minimize the damage, then shift the conversation by morning. It has repeated itself throughout this conflict, night after night. But something is changing. Even Iran's own state broadcasters are struggling to control the narrative anymore, because satellite images don't respond to press statements. They simply show what happened on the ground. And what the images show, and what Iranian officials are claiming, are starting to look like 2 very different stories. For the region, this strike represents more than a single night of combat. It signals a shift in how directly the United States is willing to confront Iran's coastal military infrastructure. For Iran, it raises a difficult question. How long can state media keep repeating "no damage" when the evidence says otherwise? And for anyone watching this conflict unfold, the timeline tells its own story. A missile attack that failed completely, followed just 2 nights later by one of the most coordinated F-16 operations of the entire war. That is not coincidence. That is consequence. What happens next depends on how Tehran chooses to respond, and whether it can still afford to deny what the world is already starting to see for itself. Now come the images, 3 of them, and together they tell a story Iranian officials are trying hard not to tell. The first image shows something that used to move, an IRGC mobile command truck, the kind used to coordinate missile and drone launches from the field. Not just damaged, folded, collapsed in on itself in a way that metal only does under a direct, close-range hit. Whoever was operating that truck's communications lost that ability in less than a second. No warning, no time to relocate. Just gone. The second image tells a quieter story, but not a less serious one. Iranian patrol boats sitting exposed along the coastline. These weren't decoys. They were real vessels, tucked close to shore, positioned the way military planners try to hide equipment from aerial detection. Concealment was the plan. but concealment only works if the other side doesn't already know exactly where to look. And on this night, that plan failed completely. The third image is the one analysts are calling the most significant. A hole cut directly into a hillside. Not a natural cave. Not old infrastructure repurposed for storage. The shape and geometry match something built for one purpose only. A hidden rocket launch position. The kind of site constructed specifically to hide weapons capable of threatening ships and forces in the region. 3 images, 3 different target types, 3 different locations along Iran's coast. But one pattern connects all of them. Every site hit was tied to the systems Iran depends on to threaten shipping lanes and forward-deployed American forces. This is where the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. Iranian state television described the night as producing no confirmed damage, but a flattened command truck doesn't fit that description. Exposed patrol boats sitting undefended on open coastline doesn't fit that description. A sealed hillside launch site doesn't fit that description either. This is the same pattern that has followed nearly every strike in this conflict. Deny first, downplay second. Move the conversation forward before anyone asks too many questions. But repetition doesn't make a strategy stronger. It just makes it easier to predict. And this time, the visual evidence doesn't leave much room for reinterpretation. Analysts note that hitting 3 separate target categories in 3 separate locations in a single night is not the kind of operation forces carry out without confidence in their intelligence. It means someone already knew where these positions were. It means the element of surprise worked exactly as intended. And it means Iran's ability to quietly rebuild these systems in the same locations has now become much harder. For years, coastal concealment was part of Iran's defensive strategy. Hide command vehicles, hide vessels, hide launch positions inside natural terrain. But concealment only holds value if it remains undiscovered. Once photographed, once confirmed, once shared publicly, that advantage disappears. This is the position Tehran finds itself in now. Trying to describe destroyed equipment as unconfirmed, trying to describe exposed vessels as normal patrol activity, trying to describe a compromised launch site as nothing significant at all. The problem is simple. Satellites don't operate on official statements. They only record what is physically there. And right now, what is physically there tells a very different story than the one Iranian state media is choosing to broadcast. The next question becomes obvious. If this is what became visible in just 3 images, what does the rest of the operation look like? Now to the photo that started this entire story. A single F-16 released just hours before the strikes began. At first glance, it looks like routine footage. But once analysts studied what was hanging off its wings, the entire operation started to make sense. Start with the aircraft itself. The F-16 wasn't chosen because it looks impressive. It was chosen for 2 simple reasons that decide almost every real military decision: availability and capacity. Which jets are ready to fly right now? And which ones can carry enough of the right weapons to hit multiple targets in a single night. The F-16 checks both boxes better than almost anything else in the current inventory. It is a workhorse. And on this night, it did exactly what workhorses are built to do. Now, the loadout. First, the GBU-39 small diameter bomb. A 250-pound precision weapon with wings that snap open mid-flight, allowing it to glide toward its target from a safe distance. Because it's compact, a single F-16 can carry 4 of them on one rack. That means 1 jet, 1 pass, 4 separate targets destroyed. That's not overkill, that's efficiency. 4 command posts, 4 launch positions, 4 surveillance nodes, gone in the time it takes to complete a single run. Second, the larger munitions. The GBU-38 and GBU-54, 500-pound precision-guided bombs. Heavier, reserved for targets that need more than precision alone. Hardened facilities, reinforced command trucks, structures that a smaller bomb simply isn't built to finish. And third, the weapon most people overlook, the APKWS, also known as the AGR-20, a laser-guided 70mm rocket. Its size isn't what matters here, its cost is, roughly $25,000 per shot. Compare that to a Patriot interceptor, which runs into the millions, or an AIM-120 missile priced at roughly $500,000 each. This rocket is the weapon of choice when the threat isn't one expensive target. It's a swarm of cheap drones, and no military can afford to fire $1 million missile at every single one. An upgraded infrared version is already in development, and that upgrade matters more than it sounds. It allows a pilot to lock onto a target just long enough to release the weapon, then immediately shift attention to the next threat while the rocket finishes its own path. At night, under night vision equipment, in a single-seat cockpit. That difference keeps a pilot's focus outside the aircraft instead of locked on one target for an extended period. Here's the part worth sitting with. None of these weapons are the biggest. None of them are the most expensive. None of them are the flashiest options available. They were chosen because they are the most efficient tools for this specific fight. Scattered targets, some located near populated areas where a heavier, less precise approach would risk unnecessary damage. Smaller, guided weapons mean tighter accuracy, and less risk of the kind of mistake that becomes its own headline. And while Iranian state television continues describing the night as producing no confirmed impact, the numbers tell a different story. 4 aim points per pass, multiple passes per aircraft, a rocket that costs less than the fuel used to fly the mission. At some point, the math stops being deniable, even for state broadcasters. Put it together, and the picture becomes clear. This wasn't a show of force. It was a demonstration of exactly how much damage can be done using the most efficient tools available, not the most expensive ones. That distinction carries weight, because it means this capability isn't temporary. It isn't a one-time show designed to make headlines and disappear. It's a repeatable system, one that can be used again at a fraction of the cost most people assume. And for Iran, that reality may be more concerning than the strike itself. Step back from the footage for a moment, because the number attached to this campaign matters just as much as the strikes themselves. In late June, the White House sent Congress a request, $87.6 billion in supplemental funding. According to analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, roughly a third of that amount, close to $30 billion, is tied directly to the cost of the Iran conflict. Munitions, operations, rebuilding weapons, stockpiles that are being used faster than originally planned. The remainder covers other defense priorities, but that first portion is clear. This conflict alone has become a multi-billion-dollar line item sitting on top of the regular defense budget. And it isn't just the money. For the first time in decades, the United States has 3 carrier strike groups operating in the Middle East at the same time, not one rotating through, 3 simultaneously, each one carrying thousands of sailors, dozens of aircraft, and a support system that has to be fueled, supplied, and protected around the clock. Put those 2 facts together, and the picture becomes sharper. This is not a limited operation running on leftover capacity. It is a sustained commitment of American resources, at a scale usually reserved for conflicts expected to last. While all of this was happening along Iran's coast, 2 other events were unfolding elsewhere, and both connect back to the same story. In Poland, early Thursday morning, air defense radar detected a Russian cruise missile crossing into Polish airspace during a larger overnight strike on Ukraine. A Polish F-16 was scrambled to respond. The missile disappeared from radar before it could be intercepted, then came down in a field roughly 90 kilometers inside Polish territory. Poland's prime minister called it exactly what it was, a Russian missile on NATO soil. No casualties this time. And that phrase, this time, carries its own weight. 2 very different regions. The same type of aircraft holding the line in both, while global tensions rise on multiple fronts at once. The second development shows up somewhere far more familiar. The fuel pump. Brent crude has been trading higher, closing near $86 a barrel this week, up more than 20% for the month, as fighting intensified, just as markets hoped for a pause. At the same time, Saudi Arabia has been coordinating with representatives from more than 40 countries to protect commercial shipping routes that Iranian-backed forces have repeatedly threatened. When nations responsible for global oil transit have to organize simply to keep tankers moving safely, this stops being a regional story. It becomes something that affects nearly everyone, everywhere. So where does this actually go from here? An operation at this scale cannot run indefinitely on carrier groups and $500,000 missiles. At some point, the approach has to change, and it already is. Saudi Arabia has shifted from observer to active participant, flying alongside American aircraft on missions targeting Iranian-backed positions. That is not a symbolic gesture. A regional partner stepping directly into the same environment changes the calculation for everyone involved. The larger shift is happening in the technology itself. Autonomous aircraft designed to fly alongside manned fighters are moving from testing phases toward active deployment. New vertical takeoff systems built for contested environments are entering the picture. And lower-cost precision munitions are following the same logic as the rockets used in this strike. Affordable enough to use in volume, precise enough to still matter. Put it together and the direction becomes clear. The goal isn't a bigger version of last night's operation. It's a version that doesn't require 3 carrier strike groups, $30 billion in emergency funding, and thousands of sailors deployed indefinitely. Autonomous systems, lower-cost weapons, regional partners carrying more of the operational weight. That is the path already being built, even as the fighting continues. Whether it arrives quickly enough to change the financial pressure of this conflict remains uncertain, but the direction has been set. Less exposure for American pilots, lower cost per target, and a broader coalition sharing more of the responsibility. The story began with footage and a familiar claim of no confirmed damage. It moves through a timeline that was clearly planned, not reactive. Through evidence that satellites don't allow anyone to rewrite, and through a strategy shifting towards speed, precision, and cost efficiency. Tehran can continue calling this limited, but the numbers, the footage, and the funding all point in the same direction. This is a war being fought with growing precision and shrinking patience.